Good afternoon, and welcome to another egregious version of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now here's your egalitarian and egocentric host, Voice of Doom. Hello. I am doing a few back-to-back diatribes, one after the other for now, because I never run out of things to say, so I may as well keep on spouting. Even though very few people are listening, aside from my stalwart fan, Nick, who I appreciate, but he kind of puts comments in the comments section, which is pretty much the only ones I get, but suggesting topics and his, interest in my opinion on certain things. So I try to oblige. I was going to talk about the logistics of doom, and I will get to that. But the political scene, I hate talking about the horse race that we call a presidential election that has to be a 2-year affair, long and drawn out, and it could be simplified much better, and we'd have a much more accurate count of who's voting for who. But they, intentionally muddle it and muddy it and make all kinds of different rules for every different state, and it becomes a big mess, which we've seen. One thing I've noticed in the last few decades is only up until recently have we talked about election interference. I never heard that term up until about 4 years ago, maybe. Now, whatever they were doing in elections, well, Watergate was election interference. They bugged the DNC, did all kinds of other malfeasance in order to win an election that they already had in the bag. So the stupidity is rampant. But I've been talking about orangey to people sometimes, and I've been saying the same thing about how his name recognition is universal, so he really doesn't have to do these rallies, and he only really does them for his own self-edification. I know he's a narcissist. I know he loves the cheering. So I was saying he really shouldn't do too many rallies and should do more one-on-one interviews, because it gets tiresome. But then I was watching YouTube, and one of the news outlets played his rally speech, and the guy's freaking mesmerizing. He's scintillating. He can just go on and on talking common sense and contrasting his administration with the current fiasco very clearly, and doesn't have to refer to notes, and doesn't stumble and bumble and mumble through his words and keep on having to backtrack everything because he said it wrong. He just talks, and he makes a hell of a lot of sense, which is not acceptable to our political system. Now, just this morning, I finished listening to Petri Dish talking from Hanoi, complaining about how it's so hard to travel around the world, and he's got to be all these places. Now, I know he sleeps on Air Force One. It's a very well-appointed plane, so don't tell me he's up all day flying around the world. He sleeps probably 20 hours a day. But his speech was classic Petri Dish. Who am I supposed to call? I got a list here of who I'm supposed to call. Stumbling over every word, having to backtrack, talking about India, and it's like, well, these third world, these emerging economy, he has to go back and forth with what he's saying because he's trying to talk off the cuff and he can't do it. And it was another embarrassment, and he was talking about how China should not be contained. They should be our ally, and we should work together toward a common blah, 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 blah. when everybody can see what's happening, and the ones that can't see it aren't paying attention, and they vote, which is why we're in the predicament we're in. But let's talk about the vote. The wags and touts on CNN and their ilk are clutching their pearls and commiserating over what they're seeing with their own eyes as far as polls. They take their own polls and they don't like what they're hearing, because from what I'm hearing, it seems like Orangey has a commanding lead amongst likely voters against Petri dish. Now, there's also the obvious socio-political fact that more people of color and more Hispanics, I don't know if they're the same thing, the blacks and the Hispanics are moving more toward Orangey, and they don't have to be a majority, because all Orangey needs is like 20% to have it be a rout. That means the D's are looking at their plantation and everybody's starting to run away and going to the opposition. And that's bad, and that's what leads to my second subject, because from what we're seeing, Orangey's going to do a second term in office if there is an election. And he's going to have to get, by his own words, he says he's going to have to get an awful lot of votes in order to win, because they cheat so much that it has to be an overwhelming majority in order for them to not be able to squirm their way out of it by cheating. And I just have to go back to my original thesis and my thoughts on the logistics of doom. Now, we have old fossils who are part of the elite, and as I've said before, I think they want power now. I mean, they already have it, but they don't want to pass on a legacy of destruction to their offspring. They want to be alive to see the realignment, the new world order, where there's a lot less people on the planet. I don't think they're interested in, waiting. I think they want to do it soon. Now, you pair that up with the fact that it's not acceptable for Orangey to do a second term, and they will curtail that and circumvent that by hook or crook any way they can, and that includes conflagrating pandemics, releasing something. Why wouldn't they? We don't want this person in office, and we will do anything up to including killing 6 billion people in order to alleviate that. So that's where I think it's going with that. So even if by the end of September we're still standing, I just don't see much hope of making it to November of 24. Not as a cohesive society. No. Western civilization will by then have decayed in earnest. But let's go to the logistics a bit. I was just thinking, what do you do when you realize there's a catastrophe? And I had to reflect back on my own history of facing catastrophes, and what did I do? Okay, I've seen a lot of mayhem here and there, but the worst two where I really thought that we had an existential threat was the 92 earthquake in Northridge, where I was living in LA, and we felt that sucker. And if you had been in certain places, like about half a mile from where I lived, and you were standing there during the earthquake, you would think the world was coming to an end, because parts of freeways started coming down, and buildings and parking lots started coming down, parking structures, in one little area of, it was around Venice and La Brea, or La Cienega, if you know the area, by the hospital. And everything fell apart there, so if you were there, you'd be going, this is the end of the world. Well, it wasn't the end of the world, but there was a lot of damage. And I got up the next day and went to work. And I couldn't get there. Or if I was going to get there, it was going to be a long time consuming project where I'd be stalled most of the time, and I hate not moving in traffic. It's one of my worst peeves. I feel claustrophobic when I'm not moving in traffic. So I have to either take a different route or go the long way. I mean, go from West LA to Hollywood via Oregon or whatever. But I went to work, and eventually the next day. I don't think I worked the first day, but the infrastructure of LA was totally effed up. So even if you go to work in an office, which I was working in a bookstore, you don't get much done. You kind of just sit around and kind of do catch-up work or this or that because the phones aren't ringing. So that's what I did there. Now the second one was 9/11. It wasn't an existential threat to me, and I saw the buildings come down, and then I got in my car and drove to work. And the same thing happened. There was no business. No phones were ringing because the whole eastern seaboard was effed up infrastructurally. So that's what I did during these catastrophes. So I'm thinking, okay, I get up in the morning and turn on YouTube, and the breaking news on one of these channels is Manhattan's been atomized by a neutron bomb. Now what do? Do I call in sick, or do I just not go to work, or do I go to work? I'm over in Nevada. I mean, unless the wind's really strong, that's not going to affect me one bit. Except the infrastructure, which may have a peripheral effect. So you got to think about those, whatever that they were talking about with corporations, where, you know, you're having an effect on somebody way far away, so you better watch what you're doing. Social governance, I guess it's called. Now, would I go to work if Manhattan was obliterated? I mean, I guess I would if they were serving, if they were open, but how would people act, really, when they are facing, you know, a total catastrophe? That's an interesting question. I can't really answer it. I know that people would go berserk, because I know from experience that once things start breaking down, people panic, and even the people you think will be stable turn out to be the ones that are bouncing off the walls. Seen it. And the people that you think might be, you know, totally lose it might just be stoic. I had a dream last night because I had the computer on, so I was probably hearing all kinds of stuff about the end of the world. And I dreamt that I saw a flash in the sky, and then I saw buildings starting to crumble in front of me. Well, that's one nice thing about having YouTube on when you're sleeping, is I have very vivid dreams. I entertain myself even when I'm asleep. But what would we do? You know, put things in the comment section if you have any ideas of how people would act if there was actually something really, really bad happening. Now, let's talk about another catastrophe that's not quite so dramatic. But just to say you get up and go, I'm going to go grocery shopping today, and you get to the store and it is padlocked. And it's like, well, I don't know what they're doing. Sign saying store closed temporarily due to blood, blah, blah, blah. You go to the other store and it's padlocked. Then suddenly you're kind of going, wait a minute now. So then you go to a little store, you go to an AM, PM, and they're not padlocked. And when you go in, there's nothing in there to buy. And then you go, oh, now what do? Do I call in sick to work? I mean, what do people actually do when these kind of things happen? I mean, they panic, but then it's like, do I get on with my life, or is this the end? And you could say the same thing about a pandemic, or an EMP, or just any kind of catastrophe that could befall us, of which there's myriad, because we're being run by a congenital idiot who's got dementia. And everybody seems to want to go along with that. So I'll leave it there. I could probably go on like this, but I just wanted to do a quick off-the-cuffer. I think I said quite a bit. So think about it and enjoy the day. Thanks. Bye.